This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Will Young. Will is a dynamic motivator, author, and public speaker who delivers keynotes throughout the world. His books, plays, scripts, and short stories are about real-life events that move, challenge, and inspire people of all ages. He joins me today on Uncorking a Story to talk about his career and the book, The Unlikely Felon, a Memoir of Ambition, Elder Care, and Jail. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Will.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much.
Happy to have you here, Will. And I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wrote a couple books on fundraising back in the day, and it was to help my consulting and the work that I was doing in the nonprofit community. That's how I got started. But how I wrote this book is a little bit different story. So I had, after everything had happened and I had completed my work release, which we'll get into all that stuff here as we go. But I talked to one of my buddies, and I said, he was actually in the financial business. And I said, I want to help you do some consulting. I want to help with grow your business. And he started talking it through, and he said, with everything that happened with you and I'm in a felony now, you're not going to be able to do that. And I literally I hung up the phone, and this disappointment and devastation was in my stomach. And I called my wife and I said, you know what, I'm going to write a book about this story. And she's like, well, this definitely isn't like a business book. This is a tell-all behind the screen, behind the odds sort of thing. But I was so devastated because of that conversation that it pushed me. I said, I want to tell this story. I think I can help a lot of people. So that's how I ended up writing this book.
Well, yeah. Well, let's dig into it then. So what is the backstory to this book? Tell me what was happening in your life before the events of this, of this story unfold. And then of course, during and after.
Yeah, I started as an entrepreneur in the late 90s. And when I got out of college, I was really fortunate. We actually had one of the first 56K ISPs.
Oh, nice.
Back in the day, but before high-speed internet and AOL and all that stuff. But anyways, we grew the company and we were doing great. Things were going really well. I was involved with nonprofit boards. My wife was a executive director of a foundation. Just things were going great. And at the same time, we started taking care of my grandparents. And if anybody, your listeners and people watching have been through this, it's a very unique process. I guess the difference with us, friends, they were two of our best friends, which you're usually not best friends with your grandparents. That's not always the situation, but we were, and we started taking care of them as they were aging. They were getting into early 80s and late 80s. And so the caretaking was taking on more and more of our time and efforts. And so fast forward up to the whole financial crisis. Our business was devastated in a lot of different ways. We had revenue went from significant 200, 300,000 a month for a small business to 40,000, 20,000. And so at the same time, as we were taking care of the grandparents, we decided to use some of the funds that were from the sale of the house and some of the other revenue channels and use it not only to take care of them, but to take care of ourselves in that situation. We had some step relatives that had agreed that we could do that. Well, as the crisis hit and things got worse through 2009, 2010, they basically came back and said, well, we didn't agree to have you use these funds, which a lot of the mistakes, I talk about that in the book. And when I do these talks, I talk about all the time. I made so many mistakes, and they were silly things like not getting everything in writing, not having witnesses to conversations. And these are people that we knew for a long time. So I never really thought about, well, I should have an agreement on that, or I should make sure that a lawyer looks at this. And so it was, as the whole process went along, it was devastating. And ended up, as I talk about in the book, in February of 2011, we had a knock on our door. And I literally had no idea the police were there to do a search of our house. So up to that point, we had discussions about estate issues and dealing with who was going to do what with the grandparents, who was going to take care of who. And so all of a sudden, knock on the door, here's the police. I was dumbfounded. I had no idea why they were at our house. I even, as I said, the boy I joked, I said, well, is it the neighbor? There's a neighbor around the corner that I think his kid might be dealing drugs. And they just looked at me like, what are you talking about? And even my wife was thinking to herself, like, are you on some weird websites? Like, what are you doing? Will? And so anyways, and that was the start of really this incredible journey through the legal system.
So tell me, what were they looking for, and what were the charges that you were eventually brought up on?
Well, it's very interesting when they do these types of searches. And my experience, of course, my life of crime before this was I had an open container ticket in college and some speeding tickets. So, and everything I saw was on TV. And when they do a search, they come in, the guns are blazing, and they're searching your house and things. But they ended up handing me a piece of paper that said it dealt with my grandparents, and basically they were looking for any sort of paperwork, us 8 or 10 years dealing with ourselves as well as the grandparents is what they were looking for. But they also, and again, as we go through this conversation, I'm a little kind of cynical about the police at times and what their agendas are, but they were looking to trump charges. So what they try to do is they try to build as much charges against you, knowing that in the end, you're probably going to plea bargain and there's some negotiating that's going to happen. And so we ended up at the end of everything getting charged with one count of theft. But they were looking for, was I running illegal businesses? Was I selling drugs? Whatever I could have potentially done. And tell my kids, and I tell everybody now, live your life so that if police show up, you don't have skeletons that will come back to haunt you, because they would have, if I was doing all kinds of illegal things, they would have had full access to it.
Yeah. So were they concerned about like the sale of your grandparents' property and what you were doing with the proceeds of it? Or I'm just trying to understand like how one found themselves in this situation.
Yeah. So over about 3 or 4 years, we had taken care of them as well as used the funds for ourselves when the business had gone through all the different issues at the time. And so they were basically wanting all the accounting on it, who did what, who used funds for what. And so but basically were saying that we had illegally used this money, which I felt I never did. I felt I always had authority. Although another thing I didn't do, we didn't update the wills, because once this process started, they wouldn't have been competent at that point to update wills. So I tell people all the time, if you're in this situation, maybe once a year, have everything updated, especially as somebody is declining in their physical and their mental states. But yeah, that's what they were looking for, was an accounting of all the funds.
Got it. So what happened? So then you wind up, do they book you? Like, what's like you, my only interaction with the criminal justice system is on Law and Order. So
Yes,
what
exactly.
happened?
Yes. That was mine. Ironically, Shawshank Redemption is my favorite movie, and I felt like I was living it. But yeah, they came in, and towards the end, they were here for about 5 hours, and they were going through everything. They were boxing things up. They took all of our computers, all of our technology, all of our paperwork, files, you name it. And at the end, I said, actually, before the end, I had said, "Are you going to arrest us?" And the lead detective said, "Well, we're going to figure that out." And I said, "Well, can I call my attorney?" Right? That's in the movies. That's what, can I give my attorney? I had a business attorney for many years, and I called him, and God bless Jeff. He's passed away since this all happened. But I called him, and he could tell, obviously, with my voice. I said, "They're searching my house." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, it deals with my grandparents." And he said, "Well, don't say anything." He started saying, "You don't want to, put yourself in a worse situation than maybe you are already in." And no, they actually left the house, did not arrest us. I think because they were trying to find whatever illegal things they thought I might have been doing. And they did an 18-month investigation. So they went around, they talked to everybody we knew. Of course, we didn't know that at the time, but during those 18 months, they did that. And then finally we were arrested. It was late May, about 18 months later, after this search had happened.
Oh my gosh. So what's that process like? I mean, and are your grandparents still alive to like know that this is happening and see this happen?
No, my grandfather had passed away in 2010. And then my grandmother was, actually, she was alive till January 2013. But of course the dementia was significant at that point. She was 95 years old,
Mhm.
significant dementia, not really termed Alzheimer's, but dementia. And so, thank God, I guess two things. Thank God they didn't deal with that. But on the other hand, if they would have been competent, they would have just said, yes, of course, Bill could have done whatever he needed to do with the estate.
Right.
But that wasn't the situation. And so, yeah, so 18 months go by. I get a call from my attorney. He says they've issued an arrest warrant. And I said, and at the time I was in an office about 30 minutes from my home. And he said, well, your best bet is to drive home. Be careful. Don't get pulled over for a speeding ticket or anything, because they'll take you in. And we found, I guess, the least traffic, how do I say it? The police station that had the least amount of people typically in it. And so I went there that night. My wife and I went there that night and turned ourselves in. We didn't want the media. We knew the media was going to be involved, or had a suspicion that they would be. And so I think they thought we were going to go to a different police station. And so we turned ourselves in. I think it was about 8 o'clock that night. Just couldn't believe it. Was surreal that it was happening.
And how old are your kids at this time?
They were small. They were, six and 2. And then
Oh,
we didn't have
shit.
our third one yet. Yeah.
So that's traumatic for them too. So now you got another, in addition to worrying about like your defense, you've got to think about, okay, well, who's going to look after our kids in like a worst case scenario, or
That's
even
right.
short term.
Well, and I had always, my saying was always, if you're not guilty, then you go to trial, you fight these things. But as I had learned through the process, the system's not set up that way. The county we were in has about a 98% conviction rate. I mean, they're one of the top counties probably in the Western United States when it comes to this stuff. And if they have certain evidence, they're going to make sure that you're convicted or you plea, whatever happens. And so, and the type of money that you have to spend, we had already, the money that we'd already had to spend even before we were arrested because of the investigation. Because the minute the search happened, we went and we had to get attorneys. We had to start the whole process. So just the amount of money, and like, you're thinking, what if you lose? Where do your children go? Who's going to take care of your children? I mean, there's just so many things that are going through your mind, and the emotions, like you said, it's unbelievable.
So before I ask what happens next, I just got to know, like, did somebody in the family rat you out? Like what? And I don't mean that the way it sounds, right? Because that
Yeah.
assumes that you did something wrong. But like, how would you have even come into the police's purview?
Well, that's what happened is, so my belief was, and my understanding was, that we could use the funds. We had discussions about it. I actually had emails. There were several emails, but I didn't get everything signed. So it was kind of handshakes and, yeah, do what you need to do. Of course, Gramps would have had no problem with this. And then some things happened in their life, which I don't go into the detail, but it changed their circumstances. And I think it changed their view of the money that had been used, which was roughly about 150,000. And so, I think their attorney, when I look back, the attorney is the one who called the police when you look at the discovery. And so I think they were kind of pushed into this, as well as maybe they felt we shouldn't have used the funds, or maybe they shouldn't have told us that we had permission, or whatever. I think there were a lot of different emotions going on, and I'm just guessing here because I obviously haven't talked to them, but that's how it happened. And of course, again, this county was all about elderly crime, high number per capita of elderly people. And so I think they saw it as an opportunity to put us on display. I mean, the media was very involved in everything. And so I think there were some multiple things working.
Yeah, so you're almost like being used as an example, a cautionary tale. Certainly, were your grandparents living with you?
No, they had actually, we tried to keep them in their house as long as we could. And it just got to the point where we were almost over there every day. They were falling, things were happening, they weren't remembering. My grandfather he actually fell asleep in the car with the car running in the garage, stuff like that. So we're trying to deal with that. And then we put him into assisted living. And that's one thing I've learned through this process too, and is when you put people in assisted living, I think a lot of people think, well, now they're taken care of. I don't have to deal with it. It's just not true. You have to be involved on a daily, weekly basis. And we had 2 people in assisted living. So everything from doctor's appointments and laundry. And I mean, there's just a list of all the things that you have to do. And to me, when we put them in assisted living, it almost made it harder for us to figure this thing out. And so, yeah, it was tough.
All right. So now you guys are in the police station. You've turned yourself in. Off to central booking, get fingerprinted. Like really, what?
All this stuff. Yeah, you do. Now they do your eyes. They take an imprint of your eye. They do your knuckles and your wrists and everything that can get ink on it. They print everything and you're on your way. So yeah.
And so what happens next? I mean, you mentioned 97% conviction rate. I assume it goes to plea bargain at some point, but
Yeah, we were very fortunate. The attorney that I had, so my wife and I had to have separate attorneys. You can't have one attorney represent 2 people, especially in this type of situation. And the attorney I had he'd been 35 years at the time, a defense attorney in the Colorado area, lots of high profile situations. He was really good. And he was very honest about it. And he said, listen, if we go to trial, it's almost like a coin flip. It's going to depend on that day. What jurors do we get? What do they have? Elderly parents? Do they have businesses? Have they ever had financial issues? All of this factors into it. And but I think he was really good about saying maybe a plea bargain is the way to go versus take this all the way. And the other thing too, the media was covering everything. So it's like, if you lose, good example, that judge isn't going to be able to be light on you. They're going to have to maybe 2 years in prison. I mean, they talked about prison. And so that I chuckle because it's probably my way of dealing with the emotions of potentially having to deal with that. But yeah, that's where we were at. So we prepared for a trial, anticipating that it may happen, and then ended up plea bargaining about a month before the trial.
okay. And so how does your life change after that plea bargain?
Yeah, it's all the media coverage that happened was devastating. My reputation, everything I'd built for those 20 years out of college, was destroyed. I mean, at one time I was going to run for the mayor of Denver. We were starting that process, and so I really wanted to make a difference. I wanted to make a difference with nonprofits, with society, and just everything I built was over. I was suicidal. I was. Even before this time, why do people ever get to a point of suicide? And through this, it was just unbelievable how mentally exhausting it was, and to lose everything. Friends, you don't know what friends you have until this happens. And the shocking thing was some of the people that I thought would be there were nowhere to be found, and some of the people I thought would never helped like there was no tomorrow. So I hope to find out who your friends are, but I did. Found out.
Yeah, that's a country song right there. You find out. All right. So, so kind of bridge the gap between then and now. How have you gone about sort of rebuilding your life, rebuilding your career, and even your relationships?
Yeah, I think now that I look back at the time, it was obviously the worst thing that you could ever imagine, other than maybe the death of your child. It was probably the worst thing you could imagine. But now I look at it so differently, and it's taken me a long time. It's probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it made me a better father, it made me a better husband, it made me a better brother, friend, you name it. And it's all about, I think for me, it was the end justified the means of where I was going. I was trying to get rich, almost at all, whatever I had to do, whatever I had to do to make that happen was where I was at. And now I look at life so differently. The last 10 years, I've coached all my kids' sports. I've spent a lot of time with them. I've been a cross guard at the school. My wife and I have an incredible relationship. Most people get divorced. They lose, when we talk about losing everything, they lose everything. It's the only thing I lost in this situation. And actually I did pretty good. And they see what that's saying is it takes a lifetime to build and, a minute to lose your reputation. But I could have lost my wife, my kids, and my life if I would have gone through with everything I was dealing with. So yeah, it's been an incredible journey. And now when I talk to people, I'm more authentic, I'm more transparent than I ever was before. And I get people who read the book and they'll email me, they'll submit things on Amazon and say, this book has helped our family. We were in a bind. We read the book. Well, you don't want to make the same mistakes, or we want to have better conversations about our elderly parents or grandparents or whoever it is. So it's been an incredible journey for me.
Well, tell me, 'cause I know what goes into writing a book, having written a few myself. Tell me about, sort of making the decision to sit down and then memorialize this, quote unquote, on paper, what that process was like, and what you learned about yourself as you're reliving this in the pages of the book.
Well, there's a saying out there, you being an author, probably heard that too. You should never write for therapy because you would usually write something that's either really good content for whatever subject, or or a biography or autobiography, whatever it is, about non-emotional things. But the reality is, and you touched on it there, is as I went through this process, I had to relive all this stuff. And so I was writing around my other active business activities. And I would take my daughter to her club sports. And while she was doing sports, I'm on the laptop and I'm writing this stuff. And I'd laugh because people would ask, what are you writing, Bill? And I'm like, oh, it's a proposal for, a business deal or whatever. I was like, how do I tell somebody that I'm writing this book? Cause I didn't know who knew our story and who didn't. And I wasn't, when you meet somebody, you're not gonna be like, oh, by the way, I had this horrible thing happen to me and I'm a felon now. So, you're going through a process, but I would write, and I wanted, my main thing too is telling the story so that it was entertaining, so that somebody would read it and not just a step-by-step point of here's what happened, but more of creating some, I guess, drama with it and how things unfolded. And I had a great story. I got a story editor. She was fantastic and really helped me even beyond just a normal editor of how do we want to set this up so that, and it's all authentic. I mean, there's not making things up, but how do we set it up so that somebody will read this and be entertained at the same time that there's a messages about learning about elderly care and all this stuff. And so that's what we did. And I think it worked out pretty good.
So it'd be remiss as an author who loves to use foreshadowing as a literary device. I know that there's something about a 3.5 index card that you wrote in college that may have foreshadowed this book. Tell me what's the story on that?
Yes. So I had gone to school to try to play baseball, and a buddy of mine, he actually walked on the football team, and we were sharing an apartment. And I had as you mentioned, the 3x5 cards, and I would write down my goals. And each one had a different goal, and I'd put them up on the wall and tack them to the wall, of course, before phones. And although I still do this to this day, I write stuff down. I'm a writer that way. And he said, Will, what's this, this one that talks about becoming a billionaire and at all costs or something, I think I wrote on there. And he said, what's that about? And I said, well, that's my goal. That's where I want to go. And some of my friends would call me Bill, William or Billiam kind of thing, with a billionaire and playing parts of it. But it became almost kind of a joke. But yeah, it was interesting. And that's what I did. I wrote down my goals and here's where I'm going. And, this is, so yeah, it was an interesting story.
There you go. Well, one of the things, Bill, I like to do to get to know my guests a little bit more is get to know them through some pop culture. So I'm curious, thinking back to the days when you were growing up, when you were a kid, what were some of your favorite things to watch on TV?
Oh gosh, that's great. I was just talking to my kids about that because I was saying we had about, I think, 7 channels to choose from. But I got to tell you, Friday night was the lineup. It was like Dukes of Hazzard, Love Boat, and then I'm trying to remember Fantasy Island.
Oh yeah,
the one too. And I was a big sports guy. I mean, I watched. You had the Saturday baseball day of the game of the week. Yeah, and I talked to kids. They're like, ESPN hasn't been around forever. I'm like, no. I remember when ESPN started. I'm like, I'll never forget. I went over to my friends and this guy Chris, he was one of my buddies. He says, my dad just got ESPN, the sports network. And so I ran over to his house and I'm like, there's sports on TV. This is so cool. Other than just, Sunday football or whatever it was. But yeah, I watched I got the wrestling. They had wrestling on
Oh, sure.
Sundays. Just Ric Flair and all those guys. I can't remember the names now, but yeah, I love sports, football, baseball, basketball. I watch everything. Yeah, it was that lineup of Dukes of Hazzard and the Daisy Dukes.
Oh yeah, Daisy Duke, and but nothing wrong with Love Boat either, and Fantasy Island. I mean, they actually redid Fantasy Island recently. They kind of rebooted it, and the newer
really?
version, it's not terrible, but it's not the same either. It's certainly not as cheesy as it was back in the late 70s, early 80s. But
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I think I missed that.
yeah, no, it's not bad. Did you remember a show called The Baseball Bunch? Were you watching TV on Saturday mornings when that was a thing, or no?
Yes, I do actually. Yeah, because you had Saturday morning cartoons. Was the only time you could watch cartoons.
Yeah, that was hosted by Johnny Bench. Johnny Bench hosted.
Oh yes, catcher for the Reds. Yes,
that's right. How about music? What did you like listening to growing up?
Oh, I was a heavy metal kid.
Oh yeah,
I was a heavy metal. I was Van Halen, Bon Jovi. Oh gosh, AC/DC, Motley Crue. And my wife and I joke around. It's like when we think of and you listen to the lyrics, the words.
Oh man, they do not age well.
Our generation's so messed up. No, I didn't say that. But you know what I'm saying.
No, some of those songs do not age well. But since you mentioned Van Halen, I have to ask: Sammy, Dave, or Gary?
Yeah, I'm close on Dave and Sammy, but I was a Sammy guy because I got to go to more of those concerts because Dave was when he was gone in 85, I think.
84, 85. Yeah.
And so I ended up going. In fact, I didn't even go to a concert with Dave. I was too young. But I went to 3 or 4, maybe more of Sammy. And so I love Sammy Hagar. He put on a great show. And still to this day, he's an entertainer. I mean, he's really good. And I was sad when Eddie died.
Oh yeah.
That was a sad day. Maybe one of the best guitarists ever. I mean, you got to put him in the top, probably 3 or 4.
Yeah. Just for not only his body of work, but just all the other people who came after him who were just clearly inspired by him. He left such a mark, and he got a lot of people, wanting to play guitar. He's probably the best thing that happened to mom and pop music stores was
no kidding.
Van Halen.
Yep. And the story, I don't know if you know the story, but when him and Alex first started, Alex was guitar and Eddie was drums.
Yeah, can you imagine that?
Yeah, and then they switched.
Yeah,
switched.
That's a smart decision right there.
Yeah.
How about last up here, letter to me. So this is, I call this a letter to me or dear younger me type question. But if you could write a letter to your younger self, what kind of advice would you give the younger Bill Young?
Yeah, I've actually done this exercise and do some of my therapy work. My therapist was like, "This write a couple of these letters, the future and the past." And I'll tell you, I'd say, first of all, save more money, compound interest. But I would say, make sure that you slow down. Make sure you appreciate every moment. Be present in everything that you're doing, and know that when the stuff does happen, I'll instead of using the other word, I'll say stuff. When the stuff happens, know that you're going to be okay. And in those moments when you're so depressed and devastated that you're thinking about maybe either taking your own life or hurting someone else or whatever, just know that you're going to make it through. You're going to be okay. And not only that, you're going to be a better man when it's done. And it's going to be hard at that moment to see it, but later on, you're going to look back and go, thank God I made it through that. That's some of the things I would say. Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, that and maybe get everything in writing.
Yes, exactly. Witness everything in writing. Yeah. Record your grandparents, everything they said. Yeah.
Well, we're talking to Bill Young. The book, of course, is The Unlikely Felon, a Memoir of Ambition, Elder Care, and Jail. Bill, where can people buy this book if they're so inclined?
Oh, at Amazon, of course. Lots of good. I think there's 45 reviews on there, and just received lots of great emails and feedback. But yeah, you can get it there. There's both digital and paperback versions. So yeah, and then email me. Let me know what you think of the book and what it does for your life.
Yeah. Well, how can people connect with you? Do you have a website or social media?
Unlikelyfelon.com. You can go there and just take a look at my background, books for sale there, and learn more about how I got in this situation, how I got out.
All right. Well, I'll be sure to put that in the show notes so people can just tap on that. Bill, thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Oh yeah. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.